Well, hello and welcome to my very first episode of the Uncommon Veterinarian podcast. Thanks for joining me. Speaking with me today from across the Atlantic is Dr. Jonathan Epstein. He's currently Associate Vice President for Conservation Medicine at the EcoHealth Alliance in New York City. And among other things, Dr. Epstein is a fellow graduate of Tufts University's DVM MPH program, and he also was the first student there to graduate with a certificate in international veterinary medicine. So, John, thanks for joining us today.
Elliott, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sure. After graduating from Tufts, John went on to make quite a name for himself in the veterinary and beyond field. He was involved with the investigations of Nipah virus, SARS, and Ebola virus, and he's published in a number of leading publications, including Science itself and Emerging Infectious Diseases. His work has also been covered in a number of media outlets, from the National Geographic Channel, which I think is pretty cool, to New York Times, the BBC, 60 Minutes, you name it. So anyway, that's enough for me. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing with the EcoHealth Alliance?
Sure. EcoHealth Alliance is a nonprofit organization. We're based in New York, and we study disease ecology. We study the reasons for why infectious diseases emerge, and typically they spill over from animal reservoirs, and most often wildlife reservoirs, into people or domestic animals. So a big part of the focus of our organization is to combine both conservation and health to understand in a systemic way what's driving diseases to spill over from wildlife and emerge in human and domestic animal populations. So that's kind of organizationally where our focus is, and we do that in a number of ways, combining disciplines on computational science, veterinary medicine, epidemiology, ecology, human medicine as well, to approach these very complex problems. And my role here, as we'll talk about, is pretty varied. And my position is vice president here, but I'm a working scientist as well, so doing a lot of on-the-ground investigation of disease ecology, collaborating with peers within the organization and certainly from different parts of the world to address some of these questions.
Okay. Wow, that all sounds really exciting to me, and I'm sure to a lot of our other listeners out there. So how long have you been with EcoHealth Alliance, and has your job changed in the time you've been there?
Sure. Just about coming on my 10-year anniversary here with the organization. It was the first research position I took after graduating from Tufts, but before that I did some practice in veterinary medicine and clinical medicine for about a year. But to answer your question about my job changing, it's certainly changed a lot, and it's a very varied job. There's a lot of different components to it, but as time went on within the organization and as I grew within the organization, responsibilities changed, and although I still am involved in on-the-ground field work, probably that's what's changed the most, is a decrease in on-the-ground field work and an increase in managerial duties, project oversight, and project development and implementation.
Okay, cool. Well, if you could imagine and pick out kind of your top day as a veterinarian that you can think of so far, could you kind of paint a picture for us of what that looked like and what made it so exciting?
I don't know if a day is enough to capture some
Well,
top
whatever you think, yeah.
experiences, but no, I've certainly had some incredibly influential and I'd say pivotal experiences that drove me into the field that I'm in today, and that really, I would say, cinched my interest in public health and emerging diseases. And I really think back to an experience I had while I was still a veterinary student, and it was during vet school. I was already developing an interest in emerging infectious diseases. I was in the combined DVM MPH public health program, which you're familiar with as well, and trying to reconcile, classic public health with veterinary medicine. And it was my first summer during vet school when I got some funding to do research in Australia, looking into a newly emerging disease called Australian bat lyssavirus, which was Australia's first experience with rabies. And the reason this was such a critical experience for me was that the summer I spent out there, about 3 months in total, was divided, both in working with a veterinary epidemiologist named Hume Field, who I'm very close to this day and still work with quite closely, and that involved understanding this virus in its natural reservoir, which were fruit bats. So that was my very first experience learning how to catch and sample these bats. It was employing all the epidemiologic principles I was learning about in school, and it was very much my introduction to real field work. But at the same time, I was also spending time at the public health offices, the Brisbane South Health Department, that was analyzing all the data of people who had been exposed to bats and potentially exposed to the rabies virus. And so I was basically working with the chief medical officer there. He handed me a stack of data describing these different cases that had been reported and asked me to analyze it and write a paper about it. So on the one hand, while I was in the field studying this virus in bats, I was also studying it in people and really starting to understand how people were getting exposed, what the most common mechanisms for exposure were. And it was so interesting to me because in practice it was combining veterinary medicine, epidemiology, and human health. And that really concretized for me, solidified my understanding and my interest in why emerging infectious diseases would become so important as a growing field that really brings together this One Health or conservation medicine concept, that human health and animal health are so closely intertwined.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that does sound exciting. And that's really cool that an experience from your first year of vet school could still be so formative in kind of shaping where you are now. So it's funny you mentioned Hume Field because I'm right in the middle of reading David Quammen's book Spillover, and he features that story about the emergence of Nipah, and Dr. Field plays a big role in that too. So it's cool you got to work with him there.
Yeah, and that, that first experience with him, independently of my current job, is really what got me my first job, because my current boss, Peter Daszak, had an NIH grant to study Nipah virus in Malaysia, and he also knew Hume Field, but he was looking to employ somebody with experience working with fruit bats in the field and viruses. And so, little did I know that first experience in vet school would qualify me, for an ongoing career working with bats and associated viruses. So it was interesting.
Cool. Yeah. So when did you first start thinking that you might be interested in first being a vet and then maybe being a non-traditional type of vet?
I would say I developed an interest in wildlife at a very early age. I was one of those kids who kind of grew up watching nature programs on TV and being completely transfixed by, looking at grizzly bears or elephants or lions, all kinds of exotic animals. And it really made me want to get out there and get closer to these animals. And again, this is a young kid, so really the desire was just to know more about them. And then at some point, veterinary medicine popped into my head as a way to work with animals. I certainly had a strong, love for animals, but it was more driven by conservation than I think through experiences with companion animals and a real interest in wildlife. And then, of course, as you grow and you go through high school and college, I started to understand more about the possibilities career-wise. And I focused more and more on veterinary medicine. I was interested in medicine already. My mother is in the medical field. I just had, I think, an inherent curiosity and interest in human medicine, but really wanted to work with animals. And so that's what drove me towards veterinary medicine. But it was always motivated by a desire to work in conservation and with wildlife. And I think it also appealed because it brought in, beyond conservation biology, it brought in medical aspects and health aspects that interested me. Although it wasn't until vet school that I was even exposed to public health. And that's when I really began thinking about infectious disease as a special interest within veterinary medicine.
Okay. Well, yeah, that sounds kind of similar to my development too. And I'm sure to a lot of people out there who realize that veterinary medicine is kind of one way to get involved in bigger picture type issues. So again, it's really encouraging to see someone like you who's actually really out there making that happen. Can you talk about any other experiences you had during or even before vet school that you thought helped you in shaping your education and preparing you for the work that you're doing now?
Sure. I'd say the other influence in my professional life was actually an undergraduate experience studying abroad. And this is something I've come to feel very strongly about for anybody who's either in college or maybe has kids in college, and that is how valuable study abroad can be in terms of professional growth, personal growth, and in general, personal richness in terms of seeing the world. So when I was an undergraduate at Brandeis University, I spent a semester, more than a semester, about 8 months abroad in Australia. And at that time, I was had already developed an interest and desire to go to vet school, and I was very interested in courses. I studied at the University of Queensland, and it had a huge zoology department, and they had a vet school. And what was particularly appealing was that in Australia, veterinary medicine is a bachelor's level degree.
Okay.
So I was eligible to take courses in the vet school as an undergraduate. I had the equivalent sort of prerequisites. So for me, that was incredibly appealing because I was able to go there and basically try out vet school before I would be applying to it. And so that was that was exciting, but B, it wasn't just vet school, it was vet school in Australia. So I took a course in comparative anatomy that included marsupials and monotremes. So I got to learn about echidnas and platypus and kangaroo anatomy. So that was pretty fun, for someone who's really interested in exotic wildlife. And secondly, aside from the academic experience there, I ended up volunteering at a rainforest sanctuary and working with a really enthusiastic wildlife biologist who was a curator there. And I got a lot of experience working with veterinarians at the rainforest sanctuary and with the animals there. So two really strong professional experiences in Australia that not only exposed me to international wildlife, but exposed me to international life. And that also, and it's what I do today is work all over the world. But I'd say that was another very formative experience in working in another culture, working with a whole different set of animals. And it just absolutely, gave me the bug for travel.
Okay. So it sounds like you'd really recommend that undergrads try to get an experience like that under their belts if they can.
Absolutely. Yeah, take every opportunity there is to, live and even work in a different culture. And I think that is incredibly enriching. That experience is also one of the things that solidified my desire to go to vet school, interacting with the veterinarians over there, being part of the vet school classes and culture. So it gave me some real insight into the process.
Okay, great. Well, in your time since graduating from all that, have you come across any programs that you think would be useful or helpful for students now who are looking at going to vet school or already in vet school?
I would say that there are, and I know from experience at Tufts, they have they have programs for people considering vet school, Adventures in Veterinary Medicine. And although I didn't go through that program, my understanding is that gives good exposure to what vet school would be like. So one, spends, I think, 8 weeks over the summer taking classes at the vet school, rotating through clinics. So that's probably excellent exposure. Certainly, another thing, something I did, and you probably did too, was volunteering at a vet clinic. That's still very important to see what the business is like for traditional clinical medicine, or at a zoo or a park, anything really that gives you experience with animals. And for those who are in vet school or graduate school for that matter and want to get more experience in field research from a more research-oriented standpoint, there are funding mechanisms for summer internships and international programs, fellowships that people can explore. And just to give an example, we have one here at EcoHealth Alliance that's funded by the National Science Foundation called EcoHealth Net. This is a program where graduate students can apply to spend up to 12 weeks at an international field site run by EcoHealth Alliance and also a broad network of our partners in different parts of the world, where they can work alongside a research scientist. They can develop a research project of their own and also help out with the larger research program. So they get good field experience, they get training in developing scientific research, all the way from hypothesis development to data collection to publication. So it's really it really is a program that gives a complete view of working in an international setting. And typically it could be working with wildlife. It might also be in a laboratory or quantitative analysis. So there's a whole array of project opportunities, but it's a great opportunity for graduate students to really get a sense of what research is like and to do that in an international setting.
Okay. Yeah, I did a little feature on the experience last month on my website, and heard from a few people who were in the process of applying for it. So I hope you got some good vet student applicants. And
Terrific.
It sounds like it definitely would have been something I would have jumped on the opportunity to do if it were around when I was at Tufts.
Well, maybe you could be a mentor for one of the programs.
Yeah, at some point down the road. I don't know if anyone wants to hang out in an army vet clinic in Sicily, but we'll see.
Doesn't sound too bad.
No, not at all. So let's see, moving on. You mentioned that you got your first job basically through that connection from Humefield to Peter Daszak to work in Malaysia on Nipah virus. Do you have any kind of insights into people who are graduating from vet school this year or will be in a couple of years and are wondering about how they can make that initial connection to this type of work?
I have to say, I think one of the most important aspects of professional development is networking. And that's probably universally true in any profession, but particularly in one where opportunities are sporadic, limited, sometimes challenging. Oftentimes it's a case of knowing the right people at the right time when they need somebody to work with them. And so as a student, a new graduate, looking to get involved in research or get exposure, attending professional conferences, introducing yourself to senior scientists who are there presenting their work, or postdoctoral students who have got some research under their belt and are probably developing their own programs. Those are critical opportunities for meeting the right people who are doing things that interest you and letting them know that you're out there and available and that you have skills that could be useful to them. And at the end of the day, if they have funding and an interest and they think of you, that connection will be really valuable. So that would be my number one piece of advice: is put yourself out there, let people know what your interests are, keep connected, without being a nuisance, but certainly keep connected, let people know you're there, refresh their memory, give them your CV, and update them when things change. And people really appreciate that, because when there are opportunities, it's they're going to turn to the people that are first in their mind.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful, I think, for everyone to hear, because I think a lot of people who are in vet school kind of rest on their academic achievements of getting there, but sometimes tend to be a little bit more reserved in talking to big, important people like that. And so I think it's really important for us all to remember how important that is, to put yourself out there, like you said. So thank you.
Everybody's been in that position at one point in their career. So, if they've forgotten that, it's a shame. But I think most people remember that, even senior scientists. So it never hurts to go up and say hello.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I know Tufts is an expensive school, and part of the reason that I'm in the Army is because of the scholarship program that I got to go through it. Do you know of any loan repayment programs, or have you participated in anything like that for people on the science and research track?
Yeah, I do, and I did. I was fortunate to discover that NIH has a loan repayment program, and that's directed towards clinicians and scientists going into public health service or research. And so, very fortunately, I don't know about you, but I came out with a lot of debt from Tufts, and that was something I perfectly was willing to accept. I knew that going in. I wanted to do this enough that it was something I just accepted that I would be able to repay. But this loan repayment program was terrific. So it's a competitive award that you apply to. You need to be doing research or working in public health in one capacity or another. You describe that to them, and then your application is reviewed. And if it's accepted, then they will begin to repay your loans, which is terrific. And there's a renewal process throughout, about every 2 years or so. But they will, in my case, they continued to repay my loans until I was debt-free from vet school. So yeah, that was an excellent program. It really frees you up financially on a personal note, and it's a real terrific incentive to get people working in public health, because the debt burden is tremendous for veterinarians. So it's nice to know that there's a way to finance that.
Wow, yeah, that's really cool. So did you have to be working in some sort of NIH-funded research in order to qualify for that, or was just any public health research in general?
Any public health in general. If you're committed to working in public health and you're doing something that is really central to your career, and you can tell that in a compelling way, that's all that's required. You don't have to be funded by NIH at all.
Okay. Wow, good to know. Well, I'll get the link from you and include that on my website when we put together a post for that. That'd be helpful.
Sure.
Another question, kind of unrelated, but what about for a vet who has been out of school for a few years practicing small animal clinics and is just kind of getting tired of that and wondering if there might be something else out there for them? Do you think it's possible for someone like that to break into this field, and how do you think they could go about doing that?
Yeah. Every so often at conferences, I get approached by veterinarians who are in that situation. They've been working in clinics. They'd like to do more with research. They perhaps did some research as an undergraduate that really interested them, or maybe in vet school. And I think it's absolutely possible. It may not necessarily be easy, because oftentimes what researchers are looking for in other researchers is research credentials and experience. So while there's plenty of clinical research out there, to do something completely different, such as field research, epidemiologic research, that may require getting an additional degree, additional qualification. That could be a PhD or a master's, or it might just be putting in some time, working with a senior scientist, getting some publications under your belt. So it really depends on what experience the person has, but it's absolutely possible to shift into research as a career interest. It just takes some planning and some preparation, and probably some patience and persistence. Those are all the P's that are required. But I have seen it, and I think it's certainly possible.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, as we're wrapping up here, maybe could you just kind of list off a few things that you really enjoy about the work that you're doing as a vet now?
Sure. One of the most stimulating things about my job, the reason I love it so much, is how varied it is. It's different every day. We're involved in such a broad array of activities, not only in research, but we do a lot in terms of policy. So one of the most important things that science can do is inform policy, because at the end of the day, why are we doing all this research? It's to make a difference, and it's often policy on a local scale, a national scale, or a global scale that can really take the science you're doing and implement change. And so as an organization, we focus a lot on policy as much as science, but we like science to inform policy. And also there's a lot of outreach, education, and training. So I mentor a lot of graduate students, vet students, and otherwise, but also medical students, ecology students. So I really enjoy that aspect too. So it's one of my favorite things about the job. And in terms of career, it's also really gratifying to be part of something bigger than yourself. And what I mean by that is we're working on problems that are hugely challenging, global in nature, that probably will require several lifetimes of work to really, to solve. But it's great to feel like you're chipping away at it, you're making a contribution, and that you're collectively working on something that's complex and large. And I really like that too. So on the one hand, some people might find that frustrating because you've got to have a long-term outlook, but at the same time, it's great to feel that you're really contributing. And we work with a tremendous network of colleagues from all different disciplines and from many different countries around the world. So the scientific global community is becoming smaller and smaller with easier communication through internet and Skype and video conferencing. It really makes it possible to have good communication with colleagues and to do meaningful work with colleagues from all over the world. So it's tremendously gratifying. It's very rewarding to work on challenges that impact things on a global scale. And those are some of my favorite things about my job right now.
Okay, well, you're getting me excited, that's for sure. How about some of the things that are a little bit more tedious in what you're doing right now?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and I think people listening to this or watching this should be aware that there's the interesting or appealing part of the work might be the international travel or working in the field and working with wildlife, and there is certainly some of that, but people need to know what makes that happen, and what makes that happen is funding. And so some of the parts that are less glamorous but so necessary are grant writing and paper writing. And some people really enjoy writing, and I enjoy writing, but it's tedious and it's labor intensive to do it well. And grants take a lot of work, and they're not always funded, so you have to get a lot of irons in the fire. So the big challenge is making sure, and especially in this economic climate, that you're diversified enough in your activities and your collaborations to be able to put in funding proposals to different funders. So that's a big challenge, a big part of the job. And I'd say that's the part that probably most people would say is maybe less fun than doing the science and getting out there in the field, but it is an absolutely necessary part of the science. Okay. And it's important for people to realize. Okay,
good to know. Well, last question for you. What ideas and dreams do you have for your own career as an uncommon veterinarian? Do you think you'll stick around doing that kind of work for a while, or do you imagine yourself moving on to bigger and better things?
Yeah, well, part of what I was saying before is that I feel like I could never finish the work that I'm doing, that there's so much to do and so many challenges. I thoroughly enjoy what I'm doing now. It's incredibly challenging, and there's always new issues and new complex challenges presenting themselves. So my vision is to do things perhaps, on a bigger scale as I advance through my career. It's great to be able to take the science you do and really influence policy and see changes happen. And that's something that changes. One's ability to influence policy changes as their career goes forward. But, in terms of what I'm doing now and in terms of understanding emerging diseases, the diseases may change throughout the course of my career, but I think the questions often are hard to answer and remain. And so, at least for the near future, I imagine continuing to do what I'm doing and working with young up-and-coming scientists also to get into this field, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Okay. That is really exciting. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I will be posting our interview as a podcast and YouTube video, and also I have a little article on my website at elliottgarber.com where we'll include some photos and links from some of the things that John and I have talked about. So thank you, John, and good luck with that awesome work. Hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks very much, Elliott. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Sure. Bye-bye.